Welcome to the Unit Economics Podcast. I'm Josh Stabinsky. On today's episode, I sit down with Jamie Kim, founder of Jamie's Farm, a New York-based granola company known for premium, small-batch products baked with ghee instead of oil. Jamie started the business while she was a student at Cornell, making each batch herself and sourcing ingredients like butter and honey from nearby farms. Since then, the company's grown to about 250 doors. In this conversation, we talk about what it takes to scale a premium granola brand built around differentiated ingredients, culinary flavors, and a higher quality product experience. From finding a co-packer that can handle dairy, managing ingredient volatility, financing inventory for retail growth, deciding which quality details matter most at scale, and building a business without defaulting to the venture-backed CPG playbook. I learned a lot during my conversation with Jamie, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Jamie, thank you so much for taking the time to do this today. If you wouldn't mind just starting with a brief background on yourself, that would be great.
Yeah, sure. So thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I'm really honored to be here. My name is Jamie. I'm the founder of Jamie's Farm Granola. We are a granola company based in New York, specializing in premium small batch products baked with ghee instead of oil. And yeah, just a little bit more about myself. I started in the food industry at a really young age. I always had a lot of interest in food and cooking just growing up. And when I got into high school, I realized that I was actually really interested in the restaurant industry. I was in New Jersey, just 1 hour outside of New York City. And so I was really interested in one specific restaurant, which was called 11 Masson Park. They had 3 Michelin stars, one of the world's top 50 best restaurants in the world, and just had this fascination with the culture that they were bringing to hospitality in the restaurant. So I ended up finding the email of the owner over there, begged him to get a job over there. I told him I would mop their floors, I would do anything. And somehow I ended up working over there for a couple of summers. So that was really what sparked my interest in the hospitality industry in general. I was cooking a lot at the time for my friends, just trying to bring those culinary concepts home. But what I recognized was there was a little bit of this knowledge gap of like what the fine dining industry was and like how that can relate to everyday food. So what I found that they really related to was granola. It was our favorite snack. We'd always eat it just straight out of the bag. And so I started experimenting with all these different flavors at home. And they said, you should sell this to Whole Foods. It's better than anything else on the shelf. Had no idea what it would take. So I just kind of pocketed that idea until I went to college. Fast forward a couple years, I went to Cornell to study hospitality management, still with the intention of going into the restaurant industry. And while I was there, I started missing my granola that I would make at home. And so I started baking it again, giving it to my friends, classmates. They loved it. So I actually decided that I would start this granola business that I was dreaming about for so many years. That started in 2017, and I've been doing it ever since.
Talk to me about what the early days looked like at Cornell and how you were sourcing and when you first thought, okay, there's something here, I'm going to pursue this full time. Like, what was it specifically that told you I need to actually jump into this and do this for real?
Yeah, sure. So when I was first doing it, I was really creating a product that I wanted to see on the market. I felt like a lot of the granola options were highly commoditized. A lot of them didn't taste very homemade. So I wanted something that had transparently sourced ingredients, was made with higher quality fats. A lot of the granolas on the market were baked with canola oils, but I wanted something that was like olive oil or grass-fed butter. And so, yeah, when I was initially starting in the town of Ithaca, which is a very local food-centric community, I knew that I wanted to source my fat locally, which was grass-fed butter. I would drive over to those farms and really get to see how the butter was being made. I got to meet all the cows that were making the butter, and I would drive that all the way back to my commercial kitchen, and I would just bake all of that by hand. I was also sourcing honey locally, so I got to know my beekeepers, got really involved in that process and picking what kind of honey I wanted to use in the product. And so I felt like the granola business was a really great way of being a lot more connected to my local community and kind of taking me off of campus, because I think it's so easy when you're a college student just to stay stuck there. So that was like one of the most beautiful parts of just starting the business. It was really from the ground up and just relying on help from the community.
At a certain point, you also went through a name change. You rebranded from Bumble and Butter to Jamie's Farm. What inspired that name change?
Yeah, so when I was at Cornell and just baking with the grass-fed butter and the honey. I thought that, that was really what the brand was going to be. I thought that it was such an integral part of what our recipe was. And it still is our signature today. We just changed the butter over to ghee today. But I felt like the name was also really limiting. A lot of people were confusing us with Bumble and Bumble, which is a hair care product. It was a little bit too long, so people would call us Bumble and Bee. So I knew that I wanted something that would stick a lot more and also wouldn't limit us ingredient-wise. I also started all that packaging and the naming myself when I was at Cornell. So I was, taking up Illustrator and I was like learning how to do everything by myself. And when we decided to change the name, I went to a branding agency and they came up with the name Jamie's Farm because I had this origin story of me visiting all these farms and getting to see how food was being grown and really just bringing all those ingredients back into my product. And so they came up with the name Jamie's Farm because it felt a lot more personable and it was more memorable, I would say.
I guess at what point in the journey did this occur? What year was this?
Yeah. So we started working with a branding agency in 2020 and we ended up rebranding in 2021. So for the initial days when I was making every single batch myself, it was 2017 until 2019. 2019 graduated and then yeah, went for that brand change in 2021.
At what point did you land your first major account?
Yeah, so my senior year, I got into my first location of Whole Foods, which was super exciting. And I think you asked this earlier, and I didn't really answer your question of when I thought that this would actually be a real thing. But, initially I thought of my business as very much a weekend hobby. I had this idea of just being this artisan in like a local cheese shop and just selling my bags of granola and like sampling it out to people. That was my definition of success. So when I unexpectedly actually got into a Whole Foods, I thought, oh, this could actually turn into something. I connected with the local forager. They got me on shelves within a couple of months. And yeah, that was my first store.
I guess if it was such a surprise, what compelled you to even attempt to do that from the start?
I think it was that seed that got planted from my friends when I was in high school. They always compared it to the other granolas on shelves at Whole Foods, and they thought that I would have a much better product than everyone else over there. So I had this crazy idea of, they were doing this brand call online at the time, and I thought, why not apply? I feel like maybe nothing will come out of it, but I might as well try and just get my name out there. And so it was crazy when I got that message from the forager and they were actually considering it.
I'm sure. It's a great story. I'm interested to hear about what had to change behind the scenes operationally in order to fulfill however many bags they were trying to put on shelf at that point. What did things look like behind the scenes once you realized I actually am going to be on shelf at Whole Foods?
Yeah. So I think when you are first starting out, you almost overestimate the amount that you're going to sell. It was just in one store, so it was entirely manageable. And I think when I was a student, I always valued staying in school, finishing school, and just staying on top of my academics. So I never wanted it to go super out of hand. So starting in that one store was really good for me. I just shipped everything out directly to the store, and yeah, it was pretty manageable. But I would say that I spent a lot of late nights in the commercial kitchen making every single bag myself.
What were the biggest lessons from the earliest days in retail?
Yeah. So it's so interesting to think about where I was when I first started because I knew nothing about the CPG industry. I didn't know how wholesale worked or what distribution looked like. Like, I didn't know how to get on the shelf and whether it was a commission base or if you were actually wholesaling it. So there was so much that I had to learn really quickly. But yeah, the first thing that I learned working with a retailer like Whole Foods was how much it's your responsibility to really move product off the shelf. It's the easy part in getting in, but then the hard part is actually getting off the shelf. So increasing brand awareness. When I was in college, I was in Ithaca, which was a 4-hour drive away from Albany, which is where our first store with Whole Foods was. So I was making that drive on the weekends so that I could demo the product myself and actually meet all of the store managers. And I realized, this is going to be a really hard game to play. Like I'm already stressed thinking about this one store. I can't imagine what it's going to be like as I continue to expand or just go into multiple stores. Like, how is this product going to be scalable in that regard? So there was a lot that I had to learn in the beginning, but I would say that that was the biggest one.
Yeah. So you graduate, and somewhere along the way, you try to find a manufacturing partner. And my understanding is that you went through a few of them early on. What did that process look like, and why was it so difficult to find the right partner to manufacture with?
Yeah, so I went to my first co-packer after I graduated, exactly a week after, and it was super exciting for me to be able to see my product scaled in bigger batches because I went from commercial kitchen, just mixing it in a small little bowl, to a really large ribbon blender. And so that first co-packer that I went to, it ended up becoming really expensive and started becoming more of like a one-sided relationship instead of a partnership. So we ultimately had to leave that co-packer. What I found to be really difficult was finding a manufacturer that could not only bake granola, but also process dairy in the facility. So ghee is that really unique component that we have in our product. Not a lot of co-packers are willing to process it because they're either vegan certified or worried about allergens, or maybe they're kosher. So there are some that are kosher but can't handle dairy. So we would have to pay a rabbi to come in and re-kosherize the ovens. These were things that I wasn't thinking about in the beginning. So I would say from the second co-packer that we went to, they were actually a great partner, but they ended up not upholding the quality of our product. I think that baking is both an art and a science. And while they were really efficient, they didn't really understand the art of making a good quality product. So we were considering severing that relationship, but they actually ended up selling their facility and giving us a 2-week notice to move out. And so we had a lot of outstanding POs that we had to fulfill, and we had to figure out how to make it really quickly. So I went back to making it myself in a commercial kitchen, hired out a bunch of people. We were making it on evenings and weekends for 6 months before we landed on our third co-packer, which we still use today. So that's a little bit of my journey.
That's so tough. How did you find the third co-packer? Is there anything interesting there to dig into?
Well, actually, what's really funny is that it was the first co-packer that I spoke to, and I didn't think that it would work out because there are certain things where I wanted to be certified gluten-free, but they didn't really have the ability to do that at the time. And so I think I ended up having to make some compromises, but they ended up being a really great partner.
I want to talk a bit about your ingredients and the quality of your ingredients. I think a lot of people might think, oh, granola, it's simple product, probably really easy to source and source the ingredients and actually manufacture it. But I don't think that's the case here. So I'd like to try something. We'll see if this lands well.
Okay.
To illustrate the quality of your ingredients, the quality of your product, and the complexity behind the scenes, I'd love it if you would pick one of your SKUs and walk me through all the ingredients you're sourcing for it, where they're all coming from, and how they all actually have to move through the supply chain and come together to form a finished product.
Okay. Yeah. This is good. So I'm trying to think of which SKU I want to pick right now. I will start with our vanilla bean granola, which is our top seller. So our vanilla bean granola has been around for a long time, since the start of the company. We're sourcing our ingredients from all over the place. So a lot of our dry ingredients come from food ingredient distributors. So that's pretty consolidated. You have your oats, pumpkin seeds, almonds, coconut chips. That comes from everywhere. And it's not entirely possible to source everything locally. Just for ease at scale, it's much easier to just get it consolidated. So coconut chips are probably coming from Indonesia, typically almonds from California, oats typically from Canada. We also purchase our ghee in 2,000-pound totes. So we're getting it on a pallet. It arrives to the facility and we put a heating pad underneath it so that it is melted and we're able to pump out all the ghee. Then we have our vanilla beans, which is what gives our granola all the flavor. We're sourcing that from Singing Dong Vanilla, who sources it directly from farmers in Papua New Guinea, and those are fair trade. We also have sour cherries that are coming from Michigan, and then we really just bring that all into the facility. Start with our dry ingredients, then we're melting down all the ghee, the honey, bringing that into the dry ingredients, doing a semi-manual hand mixing process, and then bake the granola on rotating rack ovens so that they consistently bake. Then we are packaging everything pretty much by hand right now.
So very complex, I think, for again, something that I think people might not give a ton of thought into when they pick up a bag of granola off the shelf. What's the most fragile aspect on the supply side? Is it tariffs? Is it a specific ingredient?
So over the last year, we saw that sour cherries were actually in short supply because there was a late frost that ended up happening. It depleted farmers of most of their supply, but then there was also a labor shortage on top of that just because of, immigration and not having visas for farm workers. So there are a lot of things that just compounded on top of each other where it made it really difficult to source sour cherries for our product. And that's really tough because it's our top selling flavor. So I think that was one of the most challenging parts. Tariffs also, we saw a lot of our ingredients that got hit with that. And then I would say this year, it's really just supply chain fluctuations everywhere that you see. You never know if a country is facing civil unrest and that might drive up ingredient prices. It really just varies on the day. There was a milk shortage as well, I think. Maybe it was like 1 or 2 years ago or so, and it was really hard to source ghee as well. So there's just always something that's happening, but I think you just have to figure out how to navigate that as a CPG business owner.
Yeah. My understanding is that there was a period where there was a batch or several batches of the vanilla SKU that were messed up in one way or another, and you had to
Yeah.
issue, I don't know if I would call it a formal apology, but you had to reach out to your customers. Walk me through what that looked like, and more specifically, what you took away from that experience.
Yeah. So at the time, basically what happened was we ended up getting some customer emails saying that there were some bags of vanilla bean granola that didn't have any of the cherries in them. Some of them just had zero cherries. So we got a lot of angry customer emails at the time. And once you get more than a handful, then you realize that, okay, this is a serious issue that we should publicly address in case no one else has really come forward about this. So after the sour cherry incident, we immediately went to our co-packer to try and resolve the issue. What we found out was that cherries have a different density from the granola itself. So a lot of the cherries were settling towards the bottom when you're packaging the bags of granola. So some bags were getting a ton of cherries and then others weren't. And so we had to implement a process where now we're manually weighing out all the cherries so that every single bag gets the same amount of cherries. That was a surefire way to limit that problem from ever happening again. But right now we are actually re-examining whether it is the most efficient and, if there is a better way of doing this. So I am actually in the process of trying to figure out what that might be. But I would say that anytime there is a quality issue, I take it really seriously. I don't think that there's anything more anxiety inducing for me than knowing that a product isn't up to a customer's expectations. But I think issuing out formal apologies like that is a really great opportunity for customer service. I come from a hospitality background, so I really love doing that part, and it's a good way to turn things around for the customer.
Yeah, absolutely. How many doors are you in at this point?
Yeah, so right now we're in about 250 doors. So that is a lot of regional grocery. We've got Whole Foods, Central Market, some digital accounts like Farm to People, Fresh Direct, and then we're also online and then on Amazon.
I'm interested to hear about what it looked like to go from one door to 250 doors behind the scenes, and maybe if there are any inflection points along the way or notable phases where, like, between 1 and 50 looked really similar, but then once we hit 51, for example, everything changed and we needed to completely upend how we operated, right? Were there any moments like that along the way, or was it pretty smooth and linear from 1 to 250?
I want to say that it was pretty smooth and linear, but I think last year when we expanded into Whole Foods Northeast, that actually changed a lot of things from a forecasting perspective. So our journey with Whole Foods was really slow. It started with 1 to 18 and then 60 last year. So that was super exciting, but I have to say, like, I wasn't able to forecast correctly, like, what that would look like or what the frequency of the orders would look like because your distributors are issuing POs at larger volumes. So it is eating up a lot of your inventory at once, and you do have to have the cash to fund that inventory and be able to wait for that payment, 30 or really like 90 days later from the time that you buy all the ingredients to actually getting paid. So I think that that was a huge challenge that I had to navigate in the last year. But I would say before that rollout, we were pretty good operationally on the back end. The things that first needed to happen was first going from college business to graduating and scaling. That meant, being able to have, the traceability of your ingredients, making sure that your co-packer has all of the certificates or audits in place for you to be able to sell into these bigger accounts. So that was the first thing. I would say the second is actually having operational help on the back end to be able to invoice all the orders, make sure the orders are going out on time, delivering. And so I think this was around 2021. That's when I made my first hire. She started out as a virtual assistant for us. And when it came time to, really start scaling up a lot more, she was there to fill in an operational role. So she became an amazing operations manager where she built out a lot of our back end systems so that we were processing orders effectively and just getting them out to the customer on time. And that's really just the same systems that we use today in the business. And it's been able to grow with us as we've continued to grow.
Do you have a target number of doors you'd like to be in by the end of the year?
I actually don't. I'm not really thinking of a number of doors as my success metric, actually. I'm very much focused on how much are we selling through every single door that we're in, how well are we servicing our customers. I'm also recognizing after over the last year how difficult, growing in Whole Foods has been, because we are an independently owned brand. We don't have any investors. We're entirely bootstrapped. I'm starting to be confronted with the realities of just how challenging it can be at this stage, especially as like a premium granola brand. I think as you scale, you have to start, you might have to make some compromises to somehow get that cost down a lot more. But I do very much see myself as like a regional beloved brand. And I think that, really just servicing the customers that we have right now is really my main goal. And then doors will follow. So we'll see where we're at.
You teed up one of the questions I wanted to get to very nicely. So we'll pull that up in the order and I'll ask you now. I'm interested to hear about those trade-offs that you alluded to. Where are you willing to sacrifice in order to continue scaling?
Yeah. So back in I think that my early college days are so funny to me when I think about my original recipe. So in the beginning, I was sourcing grass-fed butter from one specific dairy farm, and they had very limited supply. We would brown the butter also on top of that. When I moved over to my co-packer, I insisted that we make our own ghee to bake the granola. So that was really labor intensive as well. I started realizing that all of these extra steps that I had in the background, where I felt like it did make a huge difference in the end result, actually ended up not being as important. I mean, I have a culinary background, so I'm really interested in how all those small steps add up. But I think when you're talking about, actually scaling a product for grocery store shelves, none of that stuff really matters. So ghee was one of those trade-offs where, okay, we're going to source it from a supplier that's able to supply us more consistently, has all the necessary paperwork that is required for us to continue getting onto more store shelves. All those things where it's like the supplier is operationally efficient and able to deliver on time, that ended up just becoming more important. And then going back to the vanilla bean, we used to use real ground vanilla bean sourced from Madagascar. Back in 2018 or so, we saw the price of vanilla beans skyrocket to the price of silver per pound. So it became extremely expensive to source. And I thought about cutting the SKU from our product line. I'm glad that we didn't though, because we ended up finding a way to create that same flavor without having all of that expense. So now we're using double fold extract, which adds a ton of vanilla bean flavor into the product. And then we also use specks that still give that aroma, but also that visual speckled appearance on the granola, I would say.
Are you thinking about raising capital at this point to alleviate any of the burden that you've described?
I'm in the process of considering it. I know that I don't want to raise institutional capital. I've been working with my local banks to fund inventory, so that's been great. But it's really been a personal question and a journey for myself and where I see the brand. Because when I initially started out, I really saw it as like this side project that was really bringing me a lot of fulfillment and joy and giving and sharing my granola to more people. And I think now I like the idea of seeing my business as a path towards freedom of not having to work for someone else. And I think I sometimes have that fear of bringing in outside investors into the brand and maybe changing the way that the business is run or making changes to the recipe formulation. So it's definitely a question that I'm asking myself. But yeah, I mean, we've been running profitably over the past couple of years, so I've been really proud and excited about that. So if it means, creating a lifestyle business where I'm able to support myself, maybe it turns into a family business one day. I'm really open to those ideas. I'm really just in it for the long term.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great answer. I'm interested to hear a bit about how you think about seasonal SKUs, how you view them from a business lens, and also how you think about exclusive placement on your site, exclusive sort of D2C placement versus which SKUs to sell in retail.
So when I first started, the seasonal SKUs was really my way to cement ourselves as the premium granola brand, creating really unique culinary inspired flavors. So seasonal SKUs were really exciting for our most loyal customers through our D2C. It always kept them coming back. It was also a way to just, express our artistry, have these local brand collaborations, just do something really fun. But it's also been a really great way of just testing out what are the most popular flavors we have and does it make sense to actually bring it into retail. It's been an interesting journey because when I first started out, I had a couple of, I had a lot more savory flavors, but I realized that that's not necessarily what performs well on retail shelves. It might make sense for online where you really have control over the story, but when it's sitting on the shelf next to other products, it doesn't really make as much sense. So while I was crafting these seasonal flavors, I got a lot of really good data and feedback from our customers of what was the most popular. So it turned out that sweet flavors tend to perform a lot better, like more indulgent flavors. We've done a s'mores flavor, blueberry cornbread, strawberry corn cake, like some of these really unique flavor ideas, but it wasn't always easy to execute them at scale. So, yeah, I mean, I would say that seasonal flavors are great from a loyalty perspective. It gives our customers something to be excited about.
What does your repeat customer rate look like online?
Yeah, our repeat customer rate is about 60 to 70%.
That's really high.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, yeah, people love our stuff.
I mean, I'm not surprised. Do you think that that might be too high at times because it might be reflective of, like, potentially not bringing in as many new customers as you might want?
Mhm.
Or is it a combination of, like, no, both the numerator and denominator are going up at the same time?
Yeah, I would say that customer acquisition is something that we're trying to work on through our online store as well. All of that is really organic. It's been people either finding us through a retailer and then deciding that they want to go to our online store and buy directly from us. It's been our loyalty program, referral program, so people just sharing it with their friends. And so, yeah, I mean, it would be that, but I feel like, once we turn on the ads, get more people coming, yeah, I'm sure that number might go down.
What's been the biggest lesson learned thus far around customer acquisition? Any surprises? Any learnings around marketing in general?
Yeah, I think when I first started, I thought it would be much easier to make the sale. But I think when people are trying out a new product and they're not necessarily brand loyal to it from the start because they don't know what it is, then it ends up becoming a lot harder. I think that the number one thing for us has really just been getting our product into people's mouths. I think granola has such a perception of just being really dry and being very unenjoyable, I would say. So in general, I think when people hear the word granola, they're like, "Oh yeah, like no thanks. I'll pass on that." But if you like really like force them to try try the product when you're demoing at the grocery store, then their lives are changed and they're like, "Wow, thank you for introducing this into our lives." So I don't know. I think that's been really interesting. It almost feels like an uphill battle in that way, where you're trying to convince people that this is a very different product. Our granola kind of tastes more like a shortbread cookie, but it's made with really high quality organic ingredients, so you can feel better just snacking on it. But I think that we are just competing against the perception of what granola normally is.
How then, beyond demos, do you educate consumers?
Yeah, I would say beyond demos, we have been doing a lot of really interesting brand collaborations. So that's kind of been our bread and butter in the business. Like we did all those seasonal flavors. I think the brand collaborations just create more of this excitement around the product and what granola can be. I mean, I think as long as we're able to convey our creativity through the platform of granola and just make it seem like more of our artistic canvas, then people are more on board with it. I think our retail flavors are played a little bit more safe. So that's kind of been a question. But I would say through that channel, it's really just been demos that have been driving trial.
I'm really glad you brought up brand collaborations because I wanted to get to that next.
Hmm.
So I've noticed a couple lately, one with Yes Apples and one with Sour Cherries. And I'm guessing there are a number of others that I'm unaware of, but I'm interested to dig into what the mechanics of a partnership or brand collaboration, whatever you want to call it, look like behind the scenes.
Hmm.
Did you approach them? What does that conversation actually look like when discussing whether or not to collaborate on something like that?
Yeah, sure. So I would say it's been both sides that have reached out to each other typically. Like there are some that reach out to us or I reach out to them first. So the Yes Apples, they reached out to us and wanted to create this collaborative box and we were definitely on board with that. It sounded really exciting to us. Sour Cherries, they're a froyo company. They do a lot of pop-ups all around Brooklyn. And I actually reached out to them because I really loved their Instagram, the brand image, the seasonality of their froyos. And I felt like that was very aligned with what Jamie's Farm is as well. And I think as we've been getting more into retail, I kind of question, like how are we continuing to show up for our local community and work with some of these makers, these artisans, where I feel like that's what the heart and soul of Jamie's Farm really was. So I always try to remember that and am always looking for brand collaborations to work with. Plus, it's a really fun way to exhibit our products in a way that maybe consumers aren't always doing. So I would say that most people are just eating our products on yogurt at home or just eating it straight out of the bag, but they're probably not necessarily thinking about, this really seasonal strawberry rhubarb froyo in Brooklyn. Or, we even worked with a cake maker and they sprinkled our granolas on top of their cakes to add this crunchy texture to it. I think it just allows us to be so much more than just your typical granola.
So I think of the two that I named a little bit differently, where like in the Yes Apples example, the
Hmm.
customer is on the Yes Apples site and deliberately choosing to buy this bundle of products, and they're actively buying your product as part of that experience or as part of that purchasing decision. And then you have collaborations like the one with Sour Cherries, where it's just incorporated into the product that somebody's purchasing, but it's not like, your packaging is overtly being displayed necessarily. In the first example, somebody has just actively purchased the product, right? And in the second example, it's like, no, you still need to actually convince them to go out and buy your product. And I know that's not the
Yeah.
entire intent of the partnership. There's all the, the benefits that you alluded to, all the reasons you alluded to, but like, what do you have to do on the back end of a collaboration like the one with Sour Cherries, where you still need to convince people to then go out and buy the product itself? Is that a fair assessment? I feel like they're slightly different.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, that's a very good question, and I'm glad that you brought that up. Because yeah, I mean, I would say that you think of it as either, you have the customer buying the product, taking it home with them and actually trying it as part of the bundle. And then, if they really like that experience from the bag, then they'll come back and try it again. When you're talking about an event and it's just sprinkled on top of the froyo, it's very easy for the customer to forget about it. One thing that we try to do is just, I show up physically to the event and I have displays out and I have bags of granola. We also have something where it's like, hey, the first 10 customers that show up will get a free bag of granola to take home with them. And maybe you'll have a couple of bags of granola for sale. But yeah, it's a really interesting question of how do you get that customer to remember you and still come back for it? Like, I think I'm still trying to figure that piece out of like, what do these in-person pop-ups and events do to get them to the retailer? And how do you track that as well? But I think what's really important is just like showing up in some way because, we're local, we're in Brooklyn. You'll start gaining a lot more brand recognition in that way. So yeah, I still something that I'm thinking about.
Yeah. It sort of brings me back to the point you made around scaling, but not doing it as a means of scaling for the sake of scaling, more around like doing this because you're extremely passionate about it and building a business that you want to build and showing up in the community for the community. There's a clear theme there, and I appreciate how thoughtful you're being in that way.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's I don't think it's the easy path, especially because I feel like with social media and, seeing different brand successes happening or even just being in the CPG community within New York, I think that there typically is this narrative that there's only one way to grow your business. But I feel like the thing that's unspoken is, there's another way to do it. And what I've had to reconcile with myself also is, just because I want to do this doesn't mean that, I don't have the ambitions, I guess, to like grow my business just because my definition of success is different from someone else's. So yeah, I'm always looking out for other business owners that share similar sentiments as me.
Yeah. But I think just having your own sense of your own definition of success in itself is like really noteworthy because I do think that there are a lot of people out there that are in CPG or not that are just trying to march to the beat of other people's drums. And so I don't know, we could go on and on about this, but I appreciate the way in which you're approaching growth.
Thank you.
In doing research for this interview, I also came across a note from you on the desire to potentially start a regenerative farm at some point. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, definitely. So I never really saw Jamie's Farm as just a granola company. I always had this vision of just having it be something much greater. Again, going back to bringing community together, I had this vision for a regenerative farm where we're growing all the vegetables to have these pop-up dinners and we would have people come and gather. Maybe it would also be an artist residency, an Airbnb. Like I had so many different ideas. I think right now I'm recognizing how physically intensive a farm, like a full-scale farm can actually be. So maybe I'm being a little bit more realistic with myself, but I like the idea of having a physical space in some way. I'm not in a rush to build that out right now. I think where I'm at right now is really just focusing on making our products incrementally better every single year and really just making a name for ourselves in granola itself. But then, I think depending on where I am in life, when I'm ready to move out of the city, also, like I like the idea of having something that's more physical.
Yeah. I think I have two more questions. What's something that you've changed your mind about since starting Jamie's Farm?
So I think one thing that I changed my mind about was just how complex and nuanced everything is behind the scenes of operating a business. I obviously knew it was going to be hard, but I just didn't realize that I would have to reach different inflection points in the business where I would have to make these compromises like, do we exclusively locally source or do we expand it beyond that? So I think that's been a challenge and I also think it has made me a lot more compassionate towards other business owners because whenever I see them publicly changing something or going back on like a brand promise in some way, I do notice a lot of people reacting very strongly to that. And I think before I used to react a lot more strongly and like hold these things so true to my heart. But now I approach things with this attitude of like, if you haven't done it before, I think we need to recognize that there is a lot of nuance and gray areas sometimes.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I think we have time for one more question. Where do you see Jamie's Farm 3 to 5 years from now?
3 to 5 years from now, I see Jamie's Farm as just being the premium granola brand in the region. I want to be a really locally beloved brand, kind of similar to, like a White Mustache. If you're familiar with their yogurts, I think that they are upholders of just premium quality and really not going against their values. I think that that's something that's really exciting for me. We're working on just continuously getting into more independent retailers across the region. We work with like a lot of mom and pops, independent shops. We'll still be in Whole Foods, obviously, but yeah, I mean, we're also working on launching these snack pouches right now as well. So I'm excited to open up other channels like hotels, co-working spaces, coffee shops. But yeah, that's really my vision for the next 3 to 5 years.
Amazing. I can't wait to follow along. Jamie, thank you so much for the time. I really appreciate it. If you want to share with listeners where they can find your granola, please feel free to do so.
Yeah, so you can find our granolas online at jamies-farm.com. We're also on Amazon, and then you can find us in a lot of retailers. You can find our store finder on our website, but just to name a couple, it's Whole Foods, Farm to People, Fresh Direct, Central Market, and Mom's Organic Markets.
If you haven't tried Jamie's granola yet, I cannot recommend it enough. Thank you again. I really appreciate the time.
Thank you.
All right, let's debrief. What I really appreciated about this conversation is just how clearly Jamie's thought about the kind of business she wants to build. There's a version of the story that could have been entirely about more doors and more scale, but Jamie's thinking is much more nuanced than that. She's focused on sell-through, quality, operational discipline, and building a brand that can be ambitious without losing the things that make it personal. I think that tension shows up throughout the story. In sourcing decisions, the co-packer search, the choice to stay bootstrapped, and the way she thinks about community as part of the business itself. And I think there's a broader lesson here for anyone building a company, which is that growth is not just a question of how big a business can get. You also have to ask yourself what kind of business you want to build, what trade-offs you're willing to make, and which parts of the original idea you're determined to protect. Again, I learned so much during my conversation with Jamie, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. If you haven't already, make sure to follow and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.